by using this ratio, which is similar to what we did in tangent modulus theory. That is just to calculate the ratio between ER and E, and then multiply this by PE. So this is exactly like what we did with tangent modulus theory. So here, just to complete the comparison, please add this part here to note that strain energy is considered in tangent modulus theory. There's no strain energy that will be considered. Right? And the third one that I will just give you, I think I already gave you the expression. And the third one is provided in my presentation slides. You already have this result. And the third theory is what we call Shanley's theory. In Shanley follow pretty much the same assumptions that adapted by the tangent modulus and also reduced modulus theory, except that in Shanley's theory, he considers strain reversal. And he also considered this kind of yielding similar to the formation of, today we call it plastic hinge. So Shanley formulated the inelastic behavior in the buckling of columns by this, by considering that there's going to be only small section, this region, that will experience plastic behavior. And the rest of column will still be inelastic. So in his definition, he considered the lateral deflection to be denoted by the symbol D. And in this column, it has a depth of B. Then in the end, the failure load predicted by Shanley's theory, and here please correct this one, this should be P sub S. So we can distinguish this P from other P's. So from Shanley's theory, the failure load equals to PT, this is actually simple here is PT, times this ratio. And the tau here is the ratio between the tangent modulus and the original Young's modulus. So from here, you can calculate the predicted failure load by Shanley's theory. And let me come back to summarize this. So the formulation is already there, and I will just move to the summary. From Shanley's theory, we predict this. PS equals to PT times one plus 1 over B over 2D plus 1 plus tau divided by 1 minus tau. So this is the failure load predicted by Shanley's theory. Now, if we recap what we have talked about so far, to look at the summary, you notice that we talk about different kind of failures. We can talk about different loads. So how do we compare all these results together? That is on my slide at the very end. So we talk about these loads. We talk about PE, which PE is just pi square EI over L squared. And we also talk about PCR, right? And PCR, of course, carries all different forms. So how do you write the general expression of PCR? And from the buckling of columns, you notice that you just have to modify the length by the effective length. So the expression of KCR, the general form, can be written as this. That's pi square EI over KL squared. That's PCR. If you write it this way, you can consider all many different kind of boundary conditions for the buckling of columns. And in elastic behavior, we also talk about what? We also talk about PT, right? So that's, what's PT? Of course, the easy expression here is just to write that it is just the ratio of tangent modulus divided by the original Young's modulus times PE. This is the easy way to write it. So it's ET over E times PE. And the PE expression you already have here. And we also talk about PR. That's reduced modulus theory. Similarly, this can be determined by ER over E, also times PE, right? And the very last one is the one you have on this page, is PS, and this is not that easy to be expressed, but you have the expression, which is right here. So let's compare all these. First of all, PE and PCR are strictly applicable to elastic columns. There's no plastic behavior. Has to be elastic columns. How do you know it's elastic columns? By checking the stress, which means that your maximum stress must be less than yield stress. And the other three that we talk about it here today, they are for inelastic columns. Which means that the maximum stress can be greater than sigma y. But in the design, you know that in design, we didn't say that sigma stress will be greater than sigma y. We said sigma stress, as long as it's greater than half of the yield stress, we already consider that as inelastic column. Now, realistically speaking, typically PT will give you the lowest value. PT will be less than PS and will be less than PR, and then everything will be less than PE. Now, notice that these are not for the same column. We are just comparing different values. Okay? So for this one here, the first three, they are inelastic columns, and the PE is elastic. Okay, and in summary, we did two examples on the buckling of columns, and you notice that from the buckling of columns, the most important fact determining the buckling load is boundary conditions, right? It's basically boundary conditions. Now, from the very first example that I did in this class, you also learned that whether there's a lateral load or no lateral load, it doesn't really change the buckling load, correct? However, next topic I would like to talk about is if there's no difference, whether you have a column subjected to a horizontal force or no horizontal force, the buckling load is still the same as long as they preserve they have the same boundary conditions, then what is the difference? Or what is the effect of the lateral force? And that is the topic in buckling of beam columns, which I will talk about it in 10 minutes. So let's take a break for 10 minutes. Okay, and so let's talk about buckling of beam columns. And you have the my lectures, my slides sent to you last week, right? So I trust you already have them. And this problem here on slide number 6 is going to be our example number 10. And before I start solving this example, let's recap a little bit on few things we have learned so far. And because we will be using them extensively in the buckling of beam columns. What is the procedure that we've been adapting in evaluating problems in structural stability? What is the procedure?
Three-body diagram.
You develop a what we call kinematically admissible, right, deformation profile. So that's the first one. You have to assume that after buckling, how would the structure deform? So develop a kinematically admissible deformation. Of course, this deformation is really buckling profile. Once you have this, you have two different choices. You can either use the second order differential equation approach, or you can use the fourth order differential equation approach, right? We talk about that as well. So here you can choose either the second order or fourth order differential equation from what? From the free body diagram. And after that, what do we do? After you have the free body diagram, you develop
Boundary conditions.
not so fast, governing equation, right? Develop the governing equation of the structure. And this governing equation, of course, is either second order differential equation or the fourth order differential equation, where you write it as y double prime. And then you plug in, you applied boundary conditions to evaluate the governing equation.